We entered the forest, and right there stood that king tiger. When it rammed the first tank, it tore it apart. And the encounter with this tank left our veterans with a strong impression. Of course, it was the last hope of the Nazis to change the course of the war. But first, let's go step by step. There, the King Tiger was one of the last hopes of the leaders of the Third Reich to turn the tide of the war in their favor. It was the heaviest German tank and, considering its combined firepower and armor, became one of the strongest tanks of World War II. In this video, I will tell you how our fighters managed to capture these super tanks intact. What surprised Soviet scientists when these tanks were brought in for testing. How the shooting at these tanks at the range ended, and what the veterans who survived the battle with the King Tigers recounted. Friends, I was reading the comments on the video from my channel, and I noticed that many people admire the King Tiger, a product of Hitler's military. And accordingly, I decided to cover this topic in today's video. In their combat debuts, the newest technologies that Nazi leaders considered nearly super weapons capable of changing the course of the war, the Germans were critically unlucky. Such failures became, so to speak, a tradition. And the use of Royal Tigers on the Eastern Front was no exception. It ended in failure as well. A little later, of course, I will tell you how the monstrous tank amazed the Soviet engineers. But first, let's talk about how two barely intact King Tigers ended up in the hands of the Red Army, even though they were already considered invincible. When Soviet troops captured the bridgehead on the western bank of the Vistula, it became a major success for the Red Army. We called it the Sandomir bridgehead. The Germans, however, called it the Baranov bridgehead. Either way, both sides fully understood that this was a superb launching pad for the next offensive. Our forces tried to hold and expand it, while the Germans immediately aimed to eliminate it. We managed to build a bridge over the Vistula with a lifting capacity of 60 tons and transferred about 200 tanks of Katukov's army, including 2 heavy ones. The Germans amassed 2 tank divisions at the bridgehead, reinforced by the 501st and 509th Heavy Tiger Tank battalions. Furthermore, the 501st had just been rearmed with 6 King Tigers. After receiving fresh intelligence from the command of the 7th Guards Army and the Jads, the Germans were simply outplayed. Abandoning plans to expand the bridgehead, he ordered preparations for a strong defense. Nevertheless, at first, the Germans managed to achieve some successes. They even captured the village of grandiose on August 11th. However, this was their last success. The next day, a battle took place that became legendary. The 53rd Tank Brigade halted the offensive, and on the night of August 12-13, supported by the 71st Regiment of Yellow Tanks, 2 units launched a counterattack and recaptured the village. Leaving the village, the Germans were in a bit of a hurry, and even forgot 5 Royal Tigers there, 2 of which turned out to be not only fully operational, but also equipped with a complete set of operational documentation. Of course, these 2 fully operational Royal Tigers, numbered 102 and 502, were immediately sent for extensive external study and testing. The Dnipro test range in Kubinka, perhaps this time the best creation of the chief designer of the firm Henschel, Erwin Anders, will manage to impress Soviet engineers with something. Although our designers are already accustomed to the ingenuity and genius of the Germans, this tank truly surprised them. Moreover, our specialists were amazed even before the vehicle reached the testing ground. To reach the nearest station using the King Tiger, it was necessary to travel about 100 kilometers. Even such a short run, less than half the distance covered on a single refuel, turned out to be too much for the German marvel. On tank number 102, the idler bearings failed, and the bolts securing the drive sprocket were sheared off. The heat near 30 degrees proved deadly. Not only the engine but also the gearbox overheated. The final drive failed again, and was replaced with one taken from a damaged tank. Both tanks' tracks were breaking, especially during turns. The track tension had to be tightened every 10 kilometers because the tensioning mechanism did not hold. With great difficulty, they still managed to load the German equipment onto the platforms, and it was transported to the Moscow region. The running tests of the vehicle number 102 continued at Kubinka. They never managed to accelerate to the specified speed of 41.5 kilometers per hour. The best result was 30 kilometers per hour. They also failed to cover the specified number of kilometers on a single tank of fuel. The vehicle was supposed to consume a maximum of 700 liters per 100 kilometers according to the specifications, but it actually consumed as much as 970. While in motion, the onboard transmission again broke down beyond repair. From that moment, the K502 there turned into a wreck. The overall conclusion stated extremely low reliability of the powertrain components, transmission, and chassis. Overall, the internal components of the Turtle turned out to be mediocre. But what about the armor? They decided to fire at the King Tiger using all types of tank and field guns available at that time, including Soviet, American, and native German guns. The 57mm shell managed to only slightly damage it. Therefore, they did not even try the 45mm guns, even though they were not part of the testing program. Larger calibers left no part of the vehicle intact. The test was stopped when further shelling became completely pointless. It turned out that the 76mm domestic ZIS-3 and F-34 cannons couldn't penetrate it even from the side. However, the 85mm Soviet and 76mm American guns successfully handled this task from 800 meters. The 150mm plate proved to be much stronger. These guns could no longer penetrate the plate. Penetration was not always successful, even with larger calibers. However, the groups of hits acted like stakes, causing cracks and destruction of welded seams. As a result, the following recommendation was made: the most effective method of firing at the frontal part of the Tiger B tank. The most effective method is to consider simultaneous firing by batteries of 3 to 4 guns of 100 mm caliber artillery system, 122 and 152 millimeters at a distance of 500 to 1000 meters. If you put it simply, it means it's best not to mess with the salvo at all. Although the armor was very thick, even without penetration, chipping and cracking guaranteed the failure of vital components, or even harm, to the crew. The reason for this was found quite quickly. Chemical analysis confirmed critical problems in the German industry, with the availability of alloying additives. The armor of the first Tiger Panthers was of higher quality. In this one, molybdenum was not detected at all. In Anadiev, it was present in a rather modest amount, but the formulators generously diluted it with chromium, which was in excess. As a result, the viscosity is too low, and the armor is thick, hard, but brittle. In tests, the 88mm tank gun KVK-43, with a barrel length of 71 calibers, showed approximately equal results in penetration and armor penetration to the Soviet 122mm D-25 gun of the IS-2 tank. However, the practical rate of fire, considering correction factors, after each shot, its value was twice as high. The long-range effectiveness of the direct shot was also higher. Undoubtedly, the D-25 surpassed the German guns only in the power of the high explosive shell. They also noted the ease of operation for the gunner. The control drives are arranged so that each hand or foot performs a single function: turret rotation using the feet, vertical aiming with the right hand, and electric trigger on the left. They also evaluated the hydraulic turret drive, which completed a full rotation in 20 seconds. However, this only works when the engine is running, because manually, you had to turn the handle applying 3 kg of force, almost 700 turns. The gearbox, for such a mass, was of course quite heavy. But its modern design with automated control is impressive. It greatly interested Soviet specialists. The turning mechanism was also very successful and reduced the load on the friction clutch. Moreover, thanks to hydraulic servos, it was very easy to control and easy to maintain an efficient air filtration system for the engine. Automatic fire extinguishing system in the NTOI. battery heating and pre-start engine heating system in cold weather. Excellent ventilation system of the fighting compartment. Barrel blowout after firing and exhaust fans remove 95% of propellant gases. Final report of Soviet specialists dated February 16, 1945. It was not very suitable for the Royal Tiger in the forest. In addition to comments on the poor quality of the armor, the following defects were noted. The running gear is complex and not durable. The turning mechanism is complex and expensive. The final drive is extremely unreliable. The range is 25% less. The ammunition placement is inconvenient, except for the turret niche. The excessive dimensions and heavy weight of the tank do not correspond to its armor protection and firepower. Interestingly, it basically aligns with the opinion of Hitler's tank crews, who had the chance to fight hard on it. It is praised for the power and long-range capability of its gun, which allowed it to engage both Soviet and American tanks at a distance of about 2 kilometers. It is criticized for its heavy weight, poor mobility, and dreadful reliability. Overall, it turns out to be a rather controversial machine. It is a purely offensive tank with high firepower, serious armament, and very solid armor. Moreover, it featured easy controls and was comfortable for the crew. However, the problem with resources and reliability can essentially be attributed to the overall condition of German industry in the final phase of the war. However, it was unable to truly change the situation. It appeared too late when Germany was unlikely to be saved by anything. It was produced in small quantities, which also had to be split between 2 fronts. The operational situation often forced its use under conditions when it could not fully realize its potential. Moreover, it strained resources that were already at the limits of German industrial capacity, and it is quite often argued that for Germany, it would have been much more beneficial, instead of the expensive, labor-intensive, and material-demanding King Tigers, to continue producing tanks already mastered in manufacturing, but in much larger quantities. But what did Soviet veterans and experts really think about it? The most interesting review appeared in 1944 at RT, in the October issue of the journal Vestnik of the tank industry. The authors, after reviewing the shortcomings, among other things, concluded that by launching production of an unfinished machine, Adlers most likely relied not on actual combat capabilities, but on the moral and psychological impact of its appearance on the battlefields. Now this is really interesting. What impression it made on those who actually encountered it in battle. It is doubtful that a ghost or a monster attacking you. You are comforted by the thought that it is unreliable there and will soon break down. Or that its armor is fragile and its toughness is insufficient. Literally, immediately after the first combat encounter with the Royal Tigers on the Eastern Front. In the newspaper combat call of the 6th Guards Tank Corps. They deployed the new equipment in his sector. A combat unit appeared and was introduced with a subtitle, claiming that Soviet tanks are still the best in the world. The latest German tanks, like the 6B King Tiger, did not scare the Soviet soldiers. Our tank crews and artillerymen, at the very first encounter with them, proved the absolute superiority of our combat vehicles over them, the so-called secret weapon of the Germans. Our valiant tankers, Oskin, Udolov, and Poteha, in their very first battle, destroyed several Royal Tigers each. Indeed, the combat debut of the super tank on the Sindomir bridgehead ended in failure, but the result is somewhat exaggerated, and the article is too optimistic. However, the correspondents honestly fulfilled their years of service, trying to boost the morale of Soviet tank crews. Experts were more cautious in their statements. Rather, a brochure written by 2 colonels spread across almost all fronts, Bukrvim and Skrobovim Berdai, There was a similar brochure about the first Tiger. It contains a brief description of the Royal Tiger and provides recommendations on ways to deal with it. We started with a serious warning. One should not underestimate the danger emanating from the new German tank, which has unusually thick armor. Even compared to the standard Tiger, the authors emphasized. In their opinion, the King Tiger was indeed deadly. It could only be taken down from extremely close range. Real accounts of Soviet tankers' combat encounters with it are few and far between. And one of the reasons for such a small number of accounts is that such encounters rarely ended well for our tanks. Having noted a number of promising and original solutions, the engineers, however, found several serious design flaws caused by an excessively rushed start to production. They noted excessively large dimensions and weight, clearly not corresponding to the level of protection and firepower. As a result, low maneuverability and poor off-road reliability of overloaded units. Furthermore, it was emphasized that due to the deterioration in armor quality because of the shortage of alloying additives, it became much less durable, despite its impressive thickness. Pavel Kulishov spoke about one such episode, who fought in a T-34. He managed to penetrate the side of a German tank near the transmission with a caliber shell. Despite the fact that it caught fire afterward, a follow-up return shot destroyed the T-34. Pavel Pavlovich says he himself does not remember how he managed to escape from the burning tank and run 30 kilometers before the tank exploded. The rest of the crew perished. Nikolai Golovin, who knocked out the King Tiger, he considers his victory a coincidence. You see, it didn't happen by chance. We entered the forest. The road was so narrow you couldn't turn around. That's exactly where that Royal was standing. When he crashes into the first tank, it gets torn to pieces. Lord, we're coming in second. This one is shouting, "Let's go 30 degrees. Yeah, and I immediately started turning the turret. And you're already estimating the distance yourself. 150 meters. Consider it almost point blank, but out of panic, he fired at him. One shell, the second, the third. The men later said he even hit his cannon, recalls the veteran. Absolutely invisible to Soviet tanks and self-propelled guns. Of course, the Royal Tiger, which appeared closer to the end of the war, was not included. But it was practically impossible to penetrate it. Armor-piercing shells of 120-122 mm guns. The D-25 is a 122 mm gun, and the 100 mm 10 is also used on tanks. This is the Su-100 self-propelled. They could only hit it from 500 meters away. And even then, only if the projectile hit the edges or joints of the armor plates. And the 85 mm D5 in S-53 guns. This T-348 tank with 5 Dutch could only penetrate the weaker sides. Our tanks exploited this, benefiting from their maneuverability advantages. This is attested by Ashot Peatovich Motuni, who fought in the T-34-85 that way. Our native T-34 was unsurpassed. Its driver handled it as he wished. The Germans took a different approach, increasing the tank's armor. The King Tiger seemed impenetrable to them. But fighting it turned out to be very easy. At first, we shot at its front. Naturally, it was impossible to penetrate. Then we learned to flank it and hit its sides. Our shell would penetrate both of its sides completely. So these Tigers were very cumbersome machines. A distinguished tanker shared the secrets of tactics. And what about our famous Veroboy? Heavy self-propelled guns with 152 mm caliber, armed with the powerful ML-20 howitzer. Here is an interesting account from the artillery, from Senior Lieutenant Alexander Nikolaevich Resednik, both from Eastern Prussia. There the Germans put up fierce resistance. They then redeployed from near Berlin. Their latest tanks, King Tigers, and our divisions were assigned 152 mm self-propelled guns. And when the Germans moved their tanks, our self-propelled gun crews advanced their vehicles and opened fire. And they did it so well when a shell hit the turret of this tiger, it would simply tear the turret off. It is quite possible that the kinetic energy of a 50-kilogram shell would have been enough for that. However, there is no documentary evidence and encounters with St. John's wort and royal tigers. No information about the results of their encounters has been preserved. And the frequently seen photograph, in which a Soviet officer stands on the carcass of a decapitated tiger, this is not the result of a successful shot from a self-propelled gun. The tank was simply blown up by its crew during the retreat, and it was impossible to evacuate it. In conclusion, I would like to add one more recommendation, which was issued by the engineers of the Cuban testing ground after conducting firing tests of the King Tiger. The most effective method of firing of the frontal hull of the Tiger B tank. One must consider the simultaneous firing of batteries. 3 Ford guns from artillery systems of 100 caliber, 122 and 152 millimeters at distances from 500 to 1,000 meters. To sum up, of course, the King Tiger is a very serious and dangerous machine. Even if you compare it with the Waffenträgers, which already existed at that time. Let's say, take the Ferdinand or the regular Tiger. But here again, proper application is what matters. If you're interested, you can read about how the tank Karl-Heinz Turk performed during the battle for the capital of Hitler's Germany. If we talk about a complete evaluation of the project, then the tank appeared too late and demanded too many resources and manufacturing capacities. In my opinion, the machine is perfect from a technological point of view and mediocre from a practical point of view. Friends, well, I'll finish my story with a small anecdote. About 5 years ago, I went to Yerevan for New Year's. Oh, I called a taxi, and a BMW 7 Series arrives. The body like the one shown earlier on the BMW W. In perfect condition and driven by an elderly taxi driver. I rode with him. I was really impressed by the condition of that car, and at the end of the trip, I asked, "So why haven't you changed the car to something newer?" What did he not answer? You know, when I saw this car in person for the first time, I realized that the technology in it was ahead of its time. It's the same with the King Tiger. There too, the technology was ahead of its time. Fortunately, this did not help the Hitler-Aufsie. But that's all for today, friends. But we will definitely meet in my new episodes. You may disagree with me, and write your opinion in the comments. You can also subscribe to my channel, so you don't miss my new videos. You know best who to send this video to. Bye. Banjanao, down the yesterday. Say.